Welcome to Stacy on the Right, our StreamYard video podcast or videocast, where we are joined by Jennifer Oliver O'Connell. She's an investigative journalist. She writes at RedState. She also runs As the Girl Turns, which is her corporation that runs everything. So she has a podcast, she's a writer, she's a journalist, she investigates. So she's like the journalists of old, which we really need more of. We need to clone Jennifer Oliver O'Connell and give ourselves more journalism and more investigations, which leads to part of our conversation today. Jennifer, thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Stacy. Appreciate that.
So let's get into this because we have this like all around connection. I know lots of people who work at RedState. I know your editor at large, Kira Davis. I know your work. So I feel like I'm like tangentially like a kind of a outsider RedStater. Like I don't.
Yeah, you definitely are an honorary RedStater.
I'm honorary in my own little, on the side way, but I'm a huge fan. And I think a lot of the work that you do there, it kind of straddles where obviously the perspective is pro-Constitution, pro-truth. But obviously you have people there who have a varying viewpoint. Like you have people there who don't support President Trump. You have people there who are, really they're kind of more what leftists would call mainstream in that they don't exactly have all of the same views that maybe I have. But I think that's what makes RedState so interesting, because you have a group of people who are not ideologically identical, writing and talking and doing podcasts and all kinds of things. Talk to me about that environment, because I believe that kind of breeds good journalism.
It does. And conservatism is not an echo chamber. It shouldn't be. We hold the ideals of the Constitution and individual liberties, but how that's interpreted, how that's delivered, we all got different viewpoints on it for sure. And I think more conversation as opposed to less needs to be had on that. So yeah, we are a group of writers with different perspectives, different backgrounds. We got this awesome cartoonist who delivers his conservative thought that way, Jim Thompson. And we seek to disrupt as well as expand conservative thought. And that's why we have the diverse voices in RedState.
So that means it's more interesting. You're much more likely to possibly, as a person on the right, that's me, I'm much more likely to go over there and maybe even get triggered and have to kind of read stuff that I don't all the way agree with. But definitely. The perspective that you have is, of course, you have opinion writers, and then you have people like yourself, which you're doing investigative journalism. And one of the investigations you're currently working on involves the author of the horrible bill, Assembly Bill 5, which is a part of our shipping container backlog. You can thank AB 5. Don't like the way that Amazon is now taking longer than 2 days to deliver your packages? You can thank AB 5. And the post office changing their metric permanently so that you no longer can expect your mail in 4 business days. If it's a little letter, you can thank AB 5 in part for that as well. Not to mention the other impacts that are being felt directly in California. So talk to us about the Assemblywoman, AB 5, and then this investigation that you're doing.
So AB 5, as you said, is the lion's share cause of many of the supply chain issues, thanks to what it's done to trucking, what it's done to small independent concerns in the state. It's amazing what independent and individual business and solopreneurs, how much they make up that supply chain and how little is done now thanks to that law being in place. There are people who will not do business with even me as an independent writer in California. Outside companies and even companies in the state will not hire us, even though technically the writers are supposed to have an exemption. So AB 5 has done tremendous damage. There have been people who have been targeted unfairly because of this law. And the author of the law, Lorena Gonzalez, used to be the Assemblywoman, but she stepped down in January to take a position with California Federation of Labor, basically to head California Federation of Labor. So the organization that benefited, or who she benefited by getting AB 5 passed, now she has become the leader of it, or plans to, once the leader steps down. So she is married to a San Diego County Board of Supervisor. For those of you not outside of California, Board of Supervisors hold tremendous power. in how our county is run, where the money goes, who gets what. And so she literally paid for her husband to get this position pretty much, and everyone knows it. And he has been there for a year, and they were pro lockdown, pro COVID, response, restricting people, locking people down, threatening people. Nathan Fletcher, her husband, the supervisor, told people that, you're too stupid to research anything to do with COVID. You need to listen to our medical director, because you're just too stupid. You don't understand what we're doing. Basically he was following his buddy Gavin Newsom because he's a huge fan of Newsom. And these people have, lived large, first of all, for the government paycheck. Mr. Restriction and you need to follow the rules went to apparently a big gigantic concert at a gigantic stadium in San Diego without a mask, just like Gavin Newsom. So it's not like he's following his own COVID rules. And now the restrictions are off as well in California. So they feel like, okay, people will forget about all of their bad deeds. Mm-hmm. Thankfully, people have not. The Transparency Foundation, a watchdog organization, decided to dig into the Fletcher's tax records and their Form 700s. Fletcher refuses to release any of those public records that they've requested, according to the PRA Act, which is like the FOIA Act nationally. So they just pulled up his Form 700s, which are basically the forms where elected officials have to highlight, stock trades that they've made, who gave them what, special gifts and concerns. This organization pulled their Form 700s, and what they discovered is that they decided in 2020, right at the height of the pandemic, to buy a certain group of stock options in companies that were specifically geared toward COVID response, and companies that really earned and increased thanks to the COVID response.
So are you talking about companies that make masks or testing companies? What kind of companies were they?
CVS Health, for one, which basically did all of the testing as well as the vaccines. You've got Molina Healthcare, which is a big concern out here nationwide as well, which also was involved in the COVID response. But they have stocks in certain companies. And so these are people who have never bought stocks before. And this was the first, and they've been in public service for ages. He used to be an assemblyman. Now she's not an assembly person, but at that time she was. They've never bought stock before. They decided to buy stock somewhere in, early part of 2020. Around June, they decided to sell that stock at a profit. They made a profit off of this stock. And then, strangely enough, about a month later, they bought themselves a cabin in Big Bear, which, as I dig deeper, gives the appearance that they probably used that profit from the stock options to purchase this cabin. Now, the Transparency Foundation basically lays out the Form 700s. My RedState article points out, here is the mortgage, here's the timing of when they got money and when they gave money toward this house. And what do you think? I mean, on the one hand, we live in a free country. We should be able to purchase property if we want to, do what we want to. But as an elected official who has access to all of the information and records and what companies are doing what, particularly in regard to COVID and COVID response, and someone who encouraged all of those COVID restrictions, are you benefiting from other people's misery? Are you benefiting off of those purchases? That's what the investigation is involved with. So digging a little bit deeper, we're also seeing something called a behested payment. And again, in California, it's just a form of legal bribery, where companies are just like, well, I'll give you a behested payment if you vote on this law, or if you give it in this direction. And it's all legal in California.
Behested.
Go ahead.
I'm just laughing because, so behest, like at your behest or at my behest, right? So then if it's behested past tense, it indicates that someone, told someone else to do something. It's
Right.
past tense behested. First of all, didn't know behested was a word, so I'll have to check that out in my 18th
Amazing.
Webster dictionary that I have over there. I'll just grab it, take a look, and see if that's an old word or a new one. But so it's not surprising to me that there would be some kind of legalized bribery because California is very corrupt. Not to say that there isn't corruption across the entire United States, but California kind of leads on that. But there is this kind of idea that mustn't they have had some kind of background knowledge or some kind of insider knowledge to have seen beforehand that CVS would be a good stock to buy? And I think honestly, a lot of Americans, not just CVS employees or Walgreens employees, and not all of them. I'm not talking about the retail clerks. I'm talking about the ones who work at CVS in
Yes.
the buildings, in the lovely offices and cubicles, but also Walgreens, and then anyone who is in the pharmaceutical industry. Of certainly all of our congressional members, the elected ones, people who work in government who knew what the NIH was going to do in the way of kind of making the vaccine mandatory and then kind of providing it for free, meaning that the doses would then they're like, it's almost like they're prepaid. You know how many people there are in America. Well, they're going to get at least that number. And then we promise to give 1 billion doses here and 1 billion doses to that country. And so if we did that, you can do the math and say, okay, they stand to make a lot of money off of this. Maybe it'd be smart to buy. But most of us were too busy battling our elected officials for the right to leave our house in some places,
Yes.
go to church in some places. I mean, there were times parents were completely consumed with just trying to figure out how to force the teachers to actually show up for remote teaching, let alone in-person teaching. So many people missed the opportunity to make investments because we were so bogged down by just trying to live regular lives. To be allowed in some places in the country, you had to have a legitimate reason to be outside the house. Even, if you're going to go buy gas and you got pulled over, they want to know the legitimate reason. You had to show, well, I'm at, an eighth of a tank, I need gas. And you could still be questioned as to why you would need it since no one is supposed to be out anyway. It
Yeah.
just makes you wonder, Jennifer, had we not all been so bogged down, could we have foreseen, hey, vaccines, pharmaceuticals, CVS, Walgreens, Moderna, Pfizer, and made some money? Because I think there may be some people who did, but on the main, most of us were just too otherwise engaged.
Most definitely. Parents who had to manage their children as well as manage their Zoom time at work or whatever they did at work. And many of these officials, there are more to come according to the Transparency Foundation, but these two in particular, yeah, you just basically capitalized on knowledge that you had. And here is the inflection point. You not only capitalize, you continued the situation. You forced the situation to continue so that you could capitalize. There's where the shadow is. It's like, not only did you take this money to enrich yourself, but did you also force policies and continue to keep your thumb on the scale so that these policies kept going so that you can keep earning money? And it's coming out that could very well be the case.
Yeah. And so the power here is a part of the story, because it's one thing to say, oh, I think pharmaceuticals are going to be big going into the pandemic. You jump on that. As an elected official, that's not illegal. But then to prolong the agony for people in order to make sure that you could make as much money as possible, or, to continue the status quo to enable that kind of, revenue generation to go forward, that really is sinister, because people were actually negatively impacted. We saw an uptick in suicide. We saw an uptick in drug abuse and opioid addictions, and especially the deaths were 100,000 for last year, and they had dropped to 75,000 the year before. So, well, I should say last reportable year of the previous administration, it was 75,000, and then the next reportable year, which we were then in the pandemic, it was up, and then last year was 100,000. So we're going in the wrong direction again with opioid deaths. And these are things that exponentially impact America, because if you have 100,000 deaths, you have to assume that every one of those people had at least one family member. Maybe they had more. They had friends, they had coworkers, they had someone who cared about them. All of them are negatively impacted by the death of that person. And then you have the impacts to our mortality rate, which we're now, again, going in the wrong direction because our deaths are up. And it's actually, I thought it was driven by COVID, but when you look at the numbers, COVID deaths are not driving the increase in mortality for Americans. It's actually
No.
other factors. So,
Yes.
so what do you see coming of the investigation there in California?
Hopefully, the Transparency Foundation will keep unearthing California politicians. I'll keep an eye and monitor it as much as possible. And if possible, particularly now that we're heading into an election in November, our primaries are sometime in June. If possible, that people will be fired up enough, motivated enough, still angry enough to vote many of these officials who enrich themselves out. Many of these officials who did nothing need to go.
That would be good. So let's talk a little bit more about, because AB5 in and of itself is a net negative for the entire country because California has three of our largest ports in the entire country. They're
Yes.
located in California. And so a huge percentage of things that you find on the shelves at your grocery store or your Walmart come through a port in California. And that's, with me living in the Midwest, you would think, okay, maybe for me, but what about people on the East Coast? But the distribution channels with trucking do not prevent something from coming in on the West Coast and ending up, in Connecticut or Florida. It's that's the way it works. It does not, we don't bring all the stuff for the West Coast in only in the California ports, and then all the stuff for the East Coast only comes in on the East Coast ports. It just doesn't work that way. So that's what makes trucking so integral to everything that we do. So we know that the Biden administration is very strong on passing the PRO Act. Now, they don't talk about it anymore because there's been such negative publicity, thanks in huge part to RedState.com, writers at RedState, and then the connections that they have, spread out across the country in media, who have really taken up the charge of making sure Americans know that we don't want AB5 nationalized. But they still have it on their agenda, and occasionally the president will resurrect it in one of his speeches. I believe he mentioned it in the State of the Union.
He did.
So what will that mean for all of us if we were to allow, by some strange fluke of imagination, the PRO Act to pass nationally? What does that mean for us as Americans?
The Independent Women's Forum has estimated that there are 57 million people who are independent contractors or solopreneurs in the country. So basically, it would impact every solopreneur, every independent contractor in the country. It would take away right to work laws, which are in 27 states, and basically farm everything out to a union. Everybody has to have a union job, quote unquote, at union rates, as opposed to people who do just fine negotiating their own rates and making huge amounts of money 4 times a year, 3 times a year, with flexible schedules for their children, for their life, for their aging parents. Senior workers in California were particularly impacted. Sexism, ageism are huge in California. You're past a certain age, people do not want to hire you. And so for that age group, independent contracting worked very well. Nobody has to see you, and your skills and your experience are still powerful and still effective. It killed that extra income or that late in life income for many seniors, and it will do the same in the nation for those who are doing their second career or going to what they dreamed about doing when they were working. That would totally wipe that out for them if the PRO Act was passed.
So the idea here, and you hit on it just then, Jennifer, is that Democrats see union membership going down. It's at the lowest level in the history of unionization. And they use union dues as a primary driver of donations for the Democrats. And they also, although they've left union members behind in the dust along with Black people in their quest for their new favorite voter, which is illegal immigrants, they've left them behind policy-wise. But when it comes to getting paid, Democrats expect unions to funnel hundreds of millions of dollars to them so that they can win campaigns. And so the way to do that is, obviously, you can't have right to work where people are working without being a part of the union, but you also need a way to force people to join a union, because we kind of take for granted the things that we have in our work environment, the 5-day work week, 40 hours a week or less, being paid for overtime, salaried employees can work overtime, but the inference there is you're getting a bonus, you're getting a raise, you're getting something in return for that. And what they want to do is kind of return us to a mentality of when unions first began, where people were marching and they had pickets and they had signs and they were fighting for the right to have a life outside of work and to not have their boss control them. They want us to have that same mentality. And because we don't, they want to force us into unions so they can basically reverse engineer that mentality into us. A state of perpetual dissatisfaction is what I like to think of it as. It's people who, no matter how much they make, no matter how much they're earning, and no matter how much their employer is trying to work with them, are still immensely dissatisfied. And that's not really the case we're talking about an overwhelming number of Americans who, if they don't like their job, they just start looking for another one. They don't really need to change their work environment because they'll say to themselves, well, I've outgrown this place, or, I want to go in another direction. And so they'll leave and move somewhere else. So they really need the PRO Act for political donations. That's what this boils down to.
It boils down to not only political donations, but to go back to COVID, it's a control mechanism. If you are a part of a union, if you are dependent on their wages and their type of block, then you can be controlled. You can be told, as we saw, go get that vaccine. You can be told you have to follow these restrictions or else. If you are not subject to a union, if you are not subject to the currency models, you notice that Biden is going after the cryptocurrency.
Yeah.
If you are not part of that currency model, you can say, see you later. I'm not getting a regular paycheck from you, so why do I care? I'm getting it through these means. And so it's their manner and their way and their method of trying to, again, control the American people, to cut off independence, to cut off freedom, and to, as you said, line the coffers. They think they'll continue to get the same amount of money when they won't.
Yeah, well, and the trend against unionization is really hurting them pretty badly. And if they can't unionize Americans fast enough, you'll see union membership dwindle to below 10%. And when that happens, you're kind of in a death spiral where you have such a tiny number of people who are unionized that you kind of look over and really they're relying on the government workers who are in unions, which that goes against the interests of taxpayers, because taxpayers don't have a seat at the table when the government worker is unionized and they're negotiating with another government worker. Who's representing the taxpayer? You can't have an elected official in the room because they're not a contractual obligation. So it's a very interesting problem that they're having, and their solutions all involve totalitarianism.
Yeah, most definitely. It's a slippery slope is what it is, because if you have, as you said, people who aren't allowed to speak for the taxpayer, then you marginalize and edge out the taxpayer, which has been the slow process in trying, and now it's gotten much faster, of trying to eliminate we the people and the voice of the people out of the equations. And it seems to be a several prong attack, from the voting laws to COVID to the vaccines to laws like the PRO Act and AB5, to really not only distract and disturb, but demoralize people from fighting back.
Yeah. Well, if they control the currency, right? If they say, now we have a digital currency and it's called American currency. And so you can't have crypto, you can't have Ethereum or Bitcoin, you can't start your new little things and trade those. There's one digital currency and there's one cryptocurrency, and it's called the American currency. And so that's the only one you can use. Then they'll want to shift to that one because it's much more easily controlled. As you said, instead of me and you getting together and you paying me $600 for something, me paying you $600 for something, and us walking away and spending our money as we see fit, they can tell us, well, you can't deal with each other because you, Stacy, haven't been vaccinated, and you, Jennifer, are doing investigations into AB5. So neither of you will not do anything until you rectify these two situations.
Yeah.
That's how it will work. And I don't even think people are paying attention to it because, again, we go back, Jennifer, to the very beginning where we were talking about how people are overwhelmed. a lot of Americans are really paying close attention to Ukraine, and God bless them. I believe we should pray for the people of Ukraine and the people of Russia because they don't like Putin. They don't want the war, but they're being forced to subsidize something that, it's against their will, most of them. But we need to be praying for America. We need to be praying for our southern border and for our leadership. Our president has dementia.
Yes.
Our president is a talking Ken doll. I won't even call her a Barbie doll because remember, Ken wasn't even the smart one. Remember? Ken and
It's
Barbie
true, right. He was the arm candy.
Yeah, he was not an astronaut. He was not a doctor. He was a beach bum. And
Yeah.
Barbie was all of the things. So Camel is like the Ken doll with the string in the back where it just says, let's go to the beach. I love your sister, Stacy. She's so sweet. Like, he says dumb stuff. And that's what we're dealing with right now. So for goodness sakes, we can wear the colors of the Ukraine or we can pray for them, but we really need to focus our attention here at home.
Most definitely. And to tell you the truth, at least in terms of the people I interact with in California, people are paying attention to what is happening and keeping their eye on the ball. I mean, the gas prices sadly are helping that along. I don't care how many, memes you can throw up about, oh, you should just be happy to be well fed and blah, 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 blah. It doesn't matter. If you have to decide between getting to work and being well fed, that is a problem. Mm-hmm. And there are people who are experiencing that problem. So they want to do their song and dance. They want to, I call it the bright, shiny object syndrome. They want to throw up the bright, shiny objects to distract you from what the real issues are that you should be focusing in on. And this time around, it does not look to be working because they keep changing tactics. And, my prayers are for Ukraine and mostly for the Ukrainian people, because it's these leaders like our leaders that are doing them a disservice by doing what they do. But the American people, American issues, what's happening, but we are not well. And we need to do the things that we need to do to make our lives right and better.
Well, Jennifer, I'm so glad to hear that the people of California are plugged in and paying attention, because I know for me, it's not that I don't pay attention to the prices. I do, but it really doesn't hit me until I look at, you're about to stick your debit card in or your, credit card, whatever. You're going to stick it in and pay. And you glance over at the cart and all your groceries are bagged up. And I just have this thing about using the little cart. So big cart connotation for me is back when our kids were really small.
Yes.
We had to fill up that big cart every 2 weeks because there were 5 people and 3 of them were like little hungry monsters. Mm-hmm. So I'd fill up that big cart and then I would take it and unload all 3 of the tiny kids, strap them all in, and then spend another few minutes unloading that big, huge cart. And sometimes I would try to go when like they were with their father so I could not have to unload the kids as well as the cart. So now it's like my mission in life is to go to the grocery store. And even if I have to fill that teeny tiny little 2-tiered cart up to the very brim, I don't want to get the big cart because the big cart just has all these, it means heavy lifting work. So I go and I want to say it was like 9 bags, 9 little, little plastic grocery bags. And when I looked down and saw $130, I was like, that's weird. $130. That's weird. So the next time I went, and this is all since January, since the inflation hit 7.9%, I was like, I'll go to the store. And I ended up kind of, going off the list and then impulse buying. Jennifer, I had the whole little 2-tiered cart was filled up, to the brim, and little stuff hanging off the hooks, $320.
Oh my God.
I was like, what did I buy? So we got home. When I got home, I go in the kitchen, I start unloading. I'm like, okay, I got meat. So meat is more expensive. But it's just the uptick in price on everything. I couldn't figure out anything in the cart that was like out of order. Like, there was no alcohol. There was nothing that you would consider to be the big, huge ticket items, except I bought a little bit of steak and chicken. And it was just 5 packages. So basically 1 for each night, the next 5 nights. And I was at $300, $320. So I'm telling you, if I'm noticing it and, it's just me and my husband right now, we're empty nester semestering it out till May when the 3 college kids come back home. I know families who are still, 2 in the cart, 1 on the ground walking. I know those families are really noticing it because they're
feeling it.
Yeah, the potato chips, because those are really expensive.
Oh yeah.
All the things that come in little bags, they're convenience,
And
expensive.
if you notice, the bags are getting smaller.
Yeah.
They've changed the packaging and the volume sizes, but the prices are higher.
They are. The prices are high.
I'm flatly refusing to buy certain things for that very reason.
Well, you know what so since the kids aren't here, we're just doing less of the package, like the noodles and things like that, which they kind of are sick of them too. So we had kind of been phasing them out slowly. And whenever I pick the box up and it looks almost like it's a child size box and it says feeds 2, used to say feeds 4, or it doesn't say that at all. It just doesn't say who it feeds, but you can see how much smaller it is. I'm like, well, it looks like it's more. So I've been skipping that. Now, of course, we're still eating some rice, obviously. I mean, you have to have some kind of carbs.
Yeah.
You're eating bread, but it's just, I know that it feels like God is telling us, you just wouldn't pay attention when it was just this one thing or just this other thing. Now it's everything.
It is.
You can't look anywhere where you're not paying more. Cars, your gas bill at home for your natural gas, electricity, and then of course everything to go into the house, whether it's your the thing like even a bag of potting soil. If you need to do some I need to repot my plants. Bag of soil has gone up. So yeah,
that's affected by gas prices.
Yep.
Petroleum is in an amazing amount of things that these people who are, let's go electric, let's go clean fuel. It's like, you're going to basically eliminate your life and be living in the dirt because petroleum affects your life in ways that you don't think about.
Yep. And we can't get away from it. And so it's time for a wake up call. And so if people in California are paying attention, that means everybody else in the country is probably paying attention to. Y'all have that beautiful weather, which is a distraction. It can keep y'all serious.
Yeah.
But we have real winter, and we've been paying attention for a while. So we're glad to welcome the Californians on in. And the thing that needs to happen is in November, we need some common sense people to come into Congress and put a stop to the Biden agenda. I don't think we can do it without work from Jennifer Olive O'Connell. And I'm so glad that you're still doing investigative journalism. Kudos to you for doing that hard work because, nobody over at MSNBC is doing it. Nobody is doing it.
And they get paid, way better. They could have, they got researchers and people who could dig this stuff up. So they kind of don't have any excuse. I'm a one-man band.
No, we're getting banned and we're making, the hard choices. And they're kind of, sometimes you look at them when they had those images of Don Lemon and his husband down in Florida on vacation at that resort. And I thought, must be nice. He lies for a living. Look at look at what he's up to. This is kind of amazing. So, we will keep up with you. I hope you'll join us with more updates on the investigation as it progresses. And in any case, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Thank you, Stacey, for having me. I appreciate you taking the time.
All right. So you guys can find out more about Jennifer Oliver O'Connell, investigative journalist, RedState writer. You can go to redstate.com or you can go to asthegirlturns.com. Thank you so much for being with us today on our StreamYard podcast, video cast. Find out more at familyvisionmedia.org. We'll see you next time.
Thanks, Stacey.